It's a Boston College beatdown. Was it the refs, lackluster offense? We take a look at Temple's loss to BC in its home opener.
It was a rough game for the Owls, but there was one bright spot off the field. Actually, about 25,000 bright spots. Fans were back in the link. Owls, Eagles, Seahawks, and Carey all coming your way on Inside the Nest, live, and it starts right now.
Hello everyone and welcome into another edition of Inside the Nest. Joined by Jackson Neal, I'm Ray Dunn. Coming up, we've got Rod Carey's weekly presser and a look ahead to Temple's matchup with Wagner.
Plus, we'll go no huddle and take a look around the American. But first, we start with last Saturday and Temple's matchup against Boston College. Coming into the game, Temple was flying high after getting its first win of this season against Akron in Week 2, but Boston College was also on a roll after beating its first two opponents by an average of 34 points. It was a beautiful day at Lincoln Financial Field for the Owls' home opener in the stands for the first time in about 2 years. But the cheering didn't last long. Right from the start, Boston College gets going. Travis Levy fields the opening kickoff from the 5-yard line and finds a hole up the middle before breaking it outside for a 67-yard return all the way inside Temple's 30. And it didn't take long for the Eagles to put points on the board. Just 3 plays later, BC is in the red zone. Dennis Grosell finds Jaden Williams for a 19-yard touchdown, and for the second straight week, the Owls give up a score on the opening drive of the game. But just like in Akron, Temple's defense steps up early. It's Keyshawn Paul here, who picks off Grosell on this deep ball in what was the only turnover of the game for either side. But after a quick 3-and-out, the Eagles get the ball right back, and Pat Garwo caps off a 10-play, 8-minute drive to put Boston College up 2 scores in the first quarter. To the second quarter, where BC is right back inside the 5-yard line. And same spot, same result. This time, it's going to be Levy diving across the goal line, putting the Owls down 21-zip before halftime even begins. But unlike the Akron game, Temple is unable to come back from this deficit. Here, Edward Sadie puts the ball on the ground and Temple does recover, but that stalls the drive. The Owls end up having to settle for a 32-yard field goal from Rory Bell. It was Temple's longest drive of the day, which only went for 47 yards. And just before the end of the game, the Eagles are right back on the Cherry and White's goal line. They rush in for one more touchdown. This time it's Grosell. Boston College rushed for 179 yards and 3 TDs, outgaining the Owls by nearly 100 yards on the ground. Final score, BC 28, Temple 3.
Don't nobody know what that's like to play as a true freshman, have to, lead an offensive guys that are way older than you and all that. So, yeah, he did as well as he could, but he started to calm down and make throws towards the end.
There's always room for improvement, so that's why we weren't really worried about they keep running the ball. If they're going to keep running the ball, we just got to keep stopping them. That's it. Whatever they do, we just have to do it better.
You get really good execution at high levels, and then you get really bad execution. And so it's not a talent issue. We got to coach them better, and we got to get them going and playing because, that's, you can't have that good and that low.
A look at the numbers would suggest a much closer game than the final score. Temple actually outgained Boston College in terms of total yards. Glancing at the quarterbacks, Eagles backup Dennis Grosell struggled, completing just 5 of 13 passes with an interception. Justin Lynch's numbers were okay, but do show the offense's lack of explosive plays. He totaled just 161 yards after his big week against Akron. The difference on the ground was a real key. The Eagles soared to an average of 5.3 yards per carry, while the Owls were stifled to a mere 2.3 yards per carry.
No, and that's what I'm talking about with the penalties, those key situational penalties that were just, self-inflicted wounds is what we call them. pre-snap controllable penalties, combat penalties, I usually don't get worried about. I didn't like that. And then the other thing I didn't like is they didn't call anything on anybody else. They didn't call anything on Boston College all day. So I wasn't real happy with that. But there's nothing I can do about that. We got to get back and clean those pre-snap penalties up ourselves.
That was Rod Carey in his press conference after the game. Those are some strong words, especially following a loss.
Yeah, upon first watch, that's a brutal optic. Honestly, it's difficult to see the coach just go after the referees like that, but you have to understand the situation in which Rod Carey's presented there. He's emotional after another bad loss against another big program. He hasn't seen the tape yet. All he saw were a lot of flags against his team and not a ton against the other team. You can kind of understand where that comment may come from. It's not really excusing it, and on Monday he did mention that execution was more in those penalties than anything else.
But still, just not a good look. Even I get the emotions. I get being fired up and being upset after a loss, but they lost by 25 points. You can't blame that on a couple missed calls. Temple did get flagged more than Boston College. Temple had 11 penalties. Boston College had 3. That was a difference in the game, but if you look, it was just poor execution from Temple. You're right, Carey did touch on that on Monday, but from the Owls having penalties in the red zone, stalling their drives, just was not a good look for Temple in that matchup.
Yeah, and it comes after another bad game where the problems are just similar. A slow start, almost had the feeling of here we go again when the opening kickoff goes to the Temple 29. And then three and outs on their first 3 possessions. It's just a difficult thing to continue to overcome every week, and it's got to be frustrating for Carey.
And you can come back from that deficit against Akron. When you're playing a Power 5 team like Boston College, it's a little bit different. Now, some players who were able to execute were our week's players of the game, and they came from the defense and the special teams. For Boston College, Isaiah Graham Mobley made a big splash in his return to Philadelphia. The former Temple Owl led the Eagles with 8 total tackles as they held Temple to just 1 field goal. Then for Temple, Adam Berry was one of the only players to have a good day. The junior punter kicked the ball 6 times for 280 yards, including one that went 58 yards. But of course, if your punter is your MVP, your team is having some issues.
That's not exactly what you're looking for. We also had a little extra brotherly love in Philadelphia on Saturday. You can see here Boston College running back Patrick Garwo, who finished with a touchdown and 49 yards on the ground with his younger brother Andrew Garwo, a Temple defensive back. The pair are local kids, originally from Levittown, Pennsylvania, and starred at Conwell Egan Catholic. Their family and friends went to the game wearing white t-shirts with pictures of both of them and lettering that said Patrick versus Andrew. Give this round to the older brother. And now from a pair of brothers to a pair of quarterbacks. The Owls may be at a crossroads with what they can or should do inside their quarterback room.
For more on this position battle, we go to Inside the Nest reporter Eric Jessberger, who is live outside Edberg Olson Hall. Hi, Eric.
Thanks, Jackson and Ray. The Owls offense was in need of a strong showing Saturday in order to keep up with Boston College, a team who has averaged over 40 points per game. For such a performance, the Owls turned to freshman quarterback Justin Lynch, making his second collegiate start in place of the injured Juwan Mathis. Saturday, however, didn't go the plan for the Owls as Temple dropped their second game of the season. Both in the air and on the ground, Temple's offense displayed a lack of control, poise, and tempo. Starting quarterback Juwan Mathis didn't have the crutches this week, but he wasn't in uniform either with his leg injury. This left Lynch behind center, but unlike his numbers in Akron, Lynch was overwhelmed by Boston College's defensive schemes.
Justin knows this, so I'm not speaking out of turn. Just did not play well. His mechanics were all over, and he was rushing things. He just, I don't know. Said he was fine, but he obviously wasn't. He was just rushing things. So nerves, jitters, first time home. Couldn't get the payoff. Couldn't get the points.
Lynch did complete 17 of his 24 passes, but 161 yards and 0 touchdowns to go along with the team's 239 yards was not nearly enough in front of 25,000 fans. However, as the one receiving the snaps, Saturday's slow start falls on his lap. The ball was put in Lynch's hands for 22 total 3rd and 4th down conversion attempts combined. Only 23% were converted into first downs.
Dives maybe a yard shy of a first down.
That was one of the biggest things that, that he was struggling with early. But at the end of the day, he's a true freshman. Of course, we would have loved for him to stay in the pocket and throw the thing 30 yards like we would hope so. But at the end of the day, it didn't happen like that.
Lynch's eagerness for the big play led to multiple scrambles out of the pocket as the young freshman quarterback had the most rushing attempts on the team, more than 50% of the team's rushing totals.
There were certainly some scrambles there that, were caused by different things. Rush or misread or missed mechanic, things like that.
Missed blocks and a strong Eagles pass rush forced Lynch to tuck and run, missing out on open receivers downfield. When given the time in the pocket, the result wasn't much different, as only 18% of Lynch's passes stretched for a 15-plus yard gain, a part of the struggles which Carey put simply as an inability to cash in. A similar performance against 0-3 Wagner in the upcoming Saturday matchup would be the true red flag for this Temple offense. Which quarterback we see under center, however, is the bigger question. More on that story with Jackson Array when they break it down in No Huddle later on in our show. Reporting from Edinburgh Olsen Hall, I'm Eric Jessberger. Jackson Array, back to you guys in Studio 3.
Thanks, Eric. We will certainly answer that question later on in the show. For now, it's time for us to take our first break of the day.
Coming up, we'll take a look at Ron Carey's weekly press conference. Inside the Nest, we'll be back in just 90 seconds. Welcome back to Inside the Nest. Rod Carey addressed the media on Monday in his weekly press conference.
From injuries to a recap of Boston College, the coach gave his perspectives as the team attempts to flip the page to Wagner. Let's take a listen.
So obviously, after taking a look at the film, really kind of confirmed what thought afterwards. Offensively, just didn't do enough, and certainly Justin, didn't play well. But then, the rest of the guys need to step up with a true freshman in there. I don't think we strained to make the extra little bit that could have made the difference in some key situation, really situational football. I mean, that was a really old school game. Both offenses were really limited. They got a lead and just kind of ran it, and we did a good job at times stopping them, and we didn't convert on some key third downs that would have given us an opportunity. And then obviously the touchdown before half that made it a 3-score game was really tough, but then came out and had our opportunities in the third quarter. And there again, situational football where, didn't execute the play. And then sometimes had penalties that knocked us back into a bad situation that we have to get that corrected, and we have to get that maintained. Because certainly thought if we could have punched, one in there at the beginning of the third and then had another good drive in there, making a 1-score game, could see. But that's really what it boils down to, the mistakes that we made both pre-snap and post-snap execution. So with that, we can open it up for comments or for questions.
It seemed like Saturday, it was very much like early on there was that chess match where 3rd and long, right, BC could either come after Justin and try to force a mistake, or what they did was, right, it was rush 3 guys and make him try to figure it out. That seemed to work out well for them. I just wonder from your, just broadly speaking, when you're looking at a quarterback like that, how do you make that, determination game to game? Am I going to go after this guy now? Young guy maybe, right? Or am I going to, how do you figure that out?
It's really just a matter of those two things that you said. You either come after him or you don't. And, similar to what we did to their guy. So, not too far different plans there on that. And a lot of it is how the game is going, to be quite honest with you, and what you feel like your matchups are if you do come in blitz that you feel you have favorable matchups either with the rush or with the coverage or both. But a lot of that is dictated by game situation, like I said. So game situation and game setup, but I think you can go in with a game setup and then game situations will dictate that or change that at times.
How much of it on Saturday was them not playing well enough? How much of it was, you talked a little bit about the Saturday, maybe Justin being a little too choosy or too quick, holding on to the ball. Where does all that kind of fall when you look at the film of like how the offensive line played versus what they were doing versus what Justin was doing as a young quarterback?
Yeah, I think it's probably even split right there. At times we were, you know, doing exactly what we thought we could do and getting movement and keeping people covered up. But then maybe Justin being a little quick didn't let things develop like they should at times. And then other times when we were patient enough, we weren't covered up. So just kind of a perfect storm as it goes back and forth between those two position groups, quarterback and O-line. Those two position groups really have to be in sync. And it felt like when one was executing, the other one wasn't. So, nothing that I would say coming out of it, you can put your thumb on and say, that's it. I think that there were a bunch of moments in there that gave us what we got there, and we certainly have to get better. It was a great atmosphere, and we look forward to having a great atmosphere this week too. We got 2 more in a row at home, and we're certainly happy to be home this week too. And we were the first game since the Eagles' last game to have fans, in 2019 or early 20, whenever the Eagles last were in there. And I think everyone enjoyed it. I know our team did. That helped fuel the emotion. Got to think now there have been 2 classes on our team that and played in front of a home crowd until that game. So that was a good thing, and we're looking forward to having more of that on Saturday.
That was part 1 of Carey's press conference. Carey seemed to be a little more composed in that one than the press conference following the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I really took away from that, there's a lot of discussion on Justin Lynch, just a lackluster play on Saturday, but really narrowing in a focus something that's going to affect this team throughout the next couple of games, really throughout this entire season, is the way they have not converted on third down. They were 3 of 14 on third down on Saturday. That will not get it done. They're 4th worst in the FBS right now in converting on third downs, whether it's the quarterback not being in sync with the rest of the offense not getting what the quarterback wants to do. They have to clean up those mistakes. You cannot win football games if you're going out on third down.
And certainly on those third down plays, usually the quarterback has to stand in the pocket, go through his progressions, look at his receivers, and find who's open. Right now with Lynch, you're seeing even when he has a clean pocket, his feet are jittery. He's not comfortable in the pocket, really. He's not going through those progressions. And when in doubt, if his first guy isn't open, he just takes off and scrambles. He had 21 carries in this game. He's not looking for that deep play. He's just taking what's easy, which is good, isn't turning the ball over much, is getting a lot of completions. But on a third down, if it's third down 7, third down 8, you need to look down the field a little bit more.
If you're trying to prevent the other team from winning, you're going to prevent yourself from winning. They have to take more chances. They have to be a bit riskier on offense. And I'll come back to Justin Lynch. There's more on what Justin Lynch is going to be able to do and this team. We now move on to part 2 of Carey's Monday presser. He's talking about injuries, depth, and the slow starts in the team's 2 losses.
First, just want to ask about status of Randall Jones, whether you know what his deal is.
He looked good today. Yesterday he was obviously sore and what have you, but he looked good today, and I think he'll be ready to go. But officially, it's still day to day. But the improvement from yesterday to today gives you a lot of hope.
How's anything new on Dewan, or is he still kind of day to day heading into Saturday?
Yeah, I think we'll know a lot more tomorrow in regards to him getting out there and how much he can tolerate or how much he can do. Again, I'm hopeful. Like I told you, I think it was Saturday. All of it's a blur right now. That last 20% on an injury like this, it's that you can get stuck in there, and then all of a sudden it just goes. So I'm hoping at some point here it just goes.
It seems like, right, we're only 3 weeks in, but I got a list. I could ask you about 8 or 9 guys now. I wonder, do you feel like, and I'm not going to go through them, but do you feel like right early your depth is getting tested a little bit? Do you feel like your depth is, where it sort of needs to be here at the start?
Well, that question is a little bit of a, let me give you a broader brush on that, Sean. I don't think any coach ever feels like their depth is where they want it. They always want to be deeper, and we do too. But for us, I felt like, as inexperienced and young as we are, for the majority of the team, depth was always an issue. Even if our guys that are dinged right now, weren't dinged, we'd still have those same concerns. With that being said, you're seeing a lot of that youth and experience play and now has played and now has some time under their belt. So in a weird way, you feel good about the experience that they're gaining and how that will translate for the rest of the season coming up here.
How do you guys as a coach, and as a staff, how do you guys hold things together? What do you lean on when things aren't going right? And no matter what's happened, you're 1-2, you're coming off a 1-6 season. How do you kind of block out the outside noise, keep things together? And ahead of you, do you kind of lean on anything? Have you ever gone through something like this before in your career when you have to block this out? Because you'd had a lot of success at Northern Illinois.
Well, I mean, I think what you're probably alluding to is just, and I don't pay attention. I know different people have different philosophies on all that stuff, but is the negativity that surrounds, and like I said, is that, things can go negative. And certainly with COVID, I think the whole world's been tested on that. We have not been. We've been positive, and it's because of the choice we made and because of the effort that we're putting forward on trying to get better. And like I said, I enjoy this team, and this team is working. And even with the mistakes that we made in that game and how frustrating that was at that time, we're getting better, and we're just some situational things that we need to get better. But as far as what do you do as a coach, you go back to work, John, and as a team, you go back to work. And the choice this team has made, that's what gets you through.
You guys have gotten out to a slow start. All 3 games, down by 2 scores in the first quarter, all 3 games. What are kind of the cause or root causes of that, at least in your eyes?
Well, the first game, we got a 3 and out, and then back to stuff, and we got a safety, and then I don't think we did a good job handling the emotion of that situation. Second game, I don't think we had any emotion coming out, and then this game, felt like we had great emotion, great, just beginning of that game. I mean, it felt like the link again, and that was a good feeling. And then that big kickoff return, we had one guy get out of his lane, and and then pops, and then that kind of, pops that bubble, a little bit of emotion. So all 3 have been a little different, but I said this to the staff the other day, for a young and inexperienced team, we've had to deal with a lot in the first 3 games. Some we've dealt with it very well, some we haven't, but certainly all of it's a learning experience.
It's a grab bag of topics from Rod Carey in that second part of the presser, from injuries to depth to the inexperience, the situations that they've played themselves into. What are we looking for out of that?
I mean, the one thing I'm really looking at is his comments on the depth and the fact that depth is an issue right now. I get that there's injuries. There's injuries every single season. You're going to get players banged up and have them miss time. But this is Carey's 3rd season. We saw him bring in all of these transfers this year. We've seen him have multiple recruiting classes. Year 3 is usually when college coaches hit their stride because it's their roster. It's his players. So the fact that we're in, week 4, week 5, and we're already talking about depth is an issue, that's a problem to me. That's something that I would say to Carey is what we've been doing in the offseason. Where is that roster development that we should have been seeing coming into this year?
And even the preparation going into the week, there's been discussion of, well, we didn't have them ready when Rod Carey addresses the media after games, as this team wasn't ready. We didn't coach them up the proper way. And you can see it's evident in the slow starts. The slow starts is what I really took away from that presser. They've been outscored 40-7 in the first quarter of games this season. The last 5 games that Temple football has played, their opening 5 drives in those games, 3 punts, a safety, and a fumble loss. That tells me their struggle in their preparation going for this week. Now, that's all we have from Rod Carey for this week, as it's time for us to take a break. When we come back, we break down what to expect when the Owls take the field again in their final non-conference game. Inside the Nest, we'll be back in 90. Welcome back to Inside the Nest. FCS opponents are commonplace for Temple when putting together a non-conference schedule over the past 5 years, usually serving a September date for these programs.
This year's FCS opponent is Wagner College, who is having a rough start to its season. So far, the Seahawks have yet to win a game in 2021. The school opened its season against Buffalo and lost 69-7. They have since followed that up with losses against Central Connecticut State and St. Francis. The team's losing streak even extends back to last season. Wagner had its 2020 season postponed to the spring and lost to Duquesne and Bryant back in March. In fact, the program's last win came against Long Island University back on September 28, 2019, almost 2 years to the day of this Saturday's game against Temple.
Remember what I said about Akron 2 weeks ago? That the Owls just need to execute? Same thing goes this week. Wagner is a bad FCS program that has won just one of its last 17 games. It won't take something fancy to win this game. The key will be to avoid the sluggish starts that have plagued the Owls in the past. As I mentioned earlier, in their last 5 games, Temple has struggled in its opening drives, averaging just 1.6 yards per play. And in those 5 drives, they've punted 3 times, allowed a safety, and fumbled. It's paramount that this team leaves no doubt who the better program is from the very beginning of this game. Like playing Bucknell in 2019, establish that you are the better team and put your foot on the gas pedal.
If Wagner wants to get the program's first win of this decade, it's going to come down to its quarterback, Jalen Frazier. Frazier is a dual-threat quarterback who arrived in Staten Island back in January after transferring from Georgia Southern, and he's been the only bright spot for the Seahawks so far this season. Last week, he threw for over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns and ran in for another score. And Temple does have a defense that a mobile QB can expose. Boston College quarterback Dennis Grissel did rush for 9 yards a carry and have a touchdown on the ground. If Wagner is able to pull out a win this weekend, it's going to be because Frazier had the best game of his life. Frazier will get that chance this Saturday at Lincoln Financial Field. Kickoff is set for noon, and the game will be available to stream on ESPN+. If you're unable to tune in, you can follow along to our Twitter, @OwlSportsUpdate, where we'll be posting updates all afternoon.
Before you even begin those plans to watch on Saturday, tell us how you feel about this game. Last time we asked you about a game, 68% of you correctly chose Temple to beat Akron. That makes our audience 1-1. Do you think Temple gets back to 500 with a win, or does Wagner shock us all? Head to our Twitter @OwlSportsUpdate and vote now. Some of you who vote will likely be cheering on your selection at Lincoln Financial Field this Saturday. This matchup versus Wagner is the middle game in a 3-game homestand. Game 3 is 1 week from Saturday with the first conference tilt of the season against Memphis. The last time Temple hosted Memphis, they upset a ranked Tigers team 30-28 in 2019. The game is on October 2nd, also serves as homecoming, so get your favorite alumni and cook up some breakfast sandwiches for the noon kickoff. This is the program's first 3-game homestand since 2011, where they knocked off Miami University, Army, and Kent State consecutively. And a decade later, things are a bit different right now. Temple has to capitalize on some home cooking and flip the narrative on this season.
They really do, and it's been a tough home stretch so far. That Boston College game was one game that I was looking at where that could have been a game they could possibly steal or at least make close with the Eagles starting a backup quarterback. Right now, though, the rest of this homestand is looking pretty difficult outside of this Wagner game. That Memphis game, looking at that, last week the Tigers beat Mississippi State, who were 2-0 from the SEC. They beat them 31-29. And now Memphis is even receiving votes to be ranked. This is going to be a tough homestand for the Owls to complete out after this Wagner game.
Going only gets tougher after the homestand. Cincinnati looms in the distance beyond this homestand going into the bye week. Temple needs this game against Wagner. Can't focus too far ahead because that October schedule is not forgiving. And from the Owls homestand to this show's home stretch, we need to take a quick break, but we'll return with everybody's favorite segment.
That's right, we're going no huddle next. Inside the Nest, we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Inside the Nest. Last week, we successfully highlighted great AAC games and correctly picked the Temple BC game. Just don't check the tape on what we said about penalties.
We might have been a little off on that, but I'm positive we won't commit so many penalties when talking about penalties. Let's go no huddle. All right, Ray, let's get this started. How patient should the fans be with the team's early season struggles?
Patience is waning thin, as I can see on my timelines, that the fan base is not excited right now, and it becomes because of these big losses. Had the team showed competitive efforts in the full game against Rutgers and then against Boston College, then there's some patience to be had. But just being blown out, this is the 9th time now since the start of 2019 that Temple has lost by 20-plus points. There's reason for frustration, and there's reason why patience is waning thin amongst the fan base.
Certainly, this is not a time to be patient. These opening 3 games were all chances for Temple to make some statements. They did get that win against Akron, but only putting up 14 points against Rutgers, a local recruiting rival, that is unacceptable. Then last week against Boston College, 3 points against the Eagles. The week before, Boston College gave up 28 to UMass, and Temple could only manage a field goal against that very same team the next week. Yeah, patience, you can't have a lot of patience right now with this Temple squad.
Not a lot of patience, and conference realignment never has patience for anyone, really. A new report from CBS Sports says that the American Athletic Conference is targeting schools from the Mountain West Conference. Which rumored team do you think is the best fit for the AAC?
Yeah, the AAC is looking at Mountain West teams, but there is one school outside of the Mountain West that they're looking at, and that's the team I'm going to pick. I'm going with UAB, the University of Alabama, Birmingham. Right now, UAB is having a good stretch of its program. They've won 2 conference championships in the past 3 years, just debuted a brand new $200 million stadium this season. So UAB looks to be in a good spot of their program. I know they went on hiatus a couple years back, but right now there is money in the program. I think they could be a good addition for the AAC, especially with other schools like Liberty, Coastal Carolina, and Appalachian State not even being in consideration.
I'm thinking you looked at my notes. That's the only way I can explain this. We have the same answer here. UAB is also my pick, obviously not going with the Mountain West. And let me just take you through why I don't think the Mountain West Conference works for the AAC. The travel, the expenses, especially for Olympic sports, sending these teams across the country midweek to play conference games is just not a sustainable model of athletics. Maybe it'll work with football, and there's always talk about football breaking off and doing its own thing. So that's a whole nother conversation about the NCAA. But back to UAB, I like UAB because it's in a big metro area, growing market, and there's a lot of football fans down there. Here's one name to watch, JMU, James Madison University. If they make the jump to the FBS, don't be surprised if you see them try and make a leap at the AAC.
National title contenders in the FCS, JMU is. Now back to Temple. The quarterback position has been a question as of right now after Justin Lynch has struggled. Who do you think will start at quarterback this weekend? And then if both are healthy, who do you think should start at quarterback?
It's going to be Justin Lynch this weekend. I think giving Dewan Mathis another week to get healthy is of the utmost importance as conference play looms. Justin Lynch did have a rough day against Boston College, but you heard Jaden Blue say it's a true freshman being thrown in a difficult spot against a Power 5 opponent. Justin Lynch gets to start against Wagner, and I'd be interested to see what they do in terms of his eligibility, because that'll be his 4th game, which means if he played in another game, he would not be able to redshirt. Rod Carey had mentioned that earlier this season as a talking point with Justin Lynch playing in a game.
That is a good point, and especially because they have played Valencia in past games. But I'm going to go with Justin Lynch as well. I think there's no reason to rush Mathis back. We heard Carey talk about Mathis' status. Right now, it's kind of up in the air if he can be ready for this week. Absolutely no reason to rush him back for a Wagner game, which I think the Owls could easily win, especially with conference play looming, like you mentioned. Memphis, Cincinnati, these are games where they're going to need DeJuan behind center. It won't be good to put a true freshman against those really good defenses, those really good teams. So I think getting Justin Lynch another game, especially against Wagner, maybe try some new things, throw the deep ball, put some new things into the offense. I think that's the best route for Temple this weekend.
Regardless of who starts at quarterback, there is a game to be played on Saturday. Simply put, what is your prediction for Saturday's game?
I think it's an easy win for Temple. I think Temple gets this 35-7. They need to dominate this one and prove that they can win.
I am going to take Temple as well. Let's put up some points here. 49-14 is my final score. Let's see a lot of scoring. The Temple fans have been starved of this team scoring points. That's my prediction for this weekend.
Now it's time for our last break of the day. Coming up, we'll break down the AAC standings after a busy week for the conference. Inside the Nest will be back in just 90 seconds.
Welcome back to Inside the Nest. While we looked at the future of the AAC during No Huddle, there's plenty to talk about with the league's current members.
6 of the schools in the American took on Power 5 teams last week, and that led to some shakeup in the non-conference standings. We bring on Inside the Nest reporter Emily Cochran to break it all down over at the studio set.
Thanks, guys. We are already 3 weeks into college football, and so far, things are not too surprising. With not a single conference game played yet, the overall standings are looking very similar to the preseason predictions, at least among these non-conference games. Remember, conference games are really what counts the most, but these non-conference scores do give us a glimpse into what we might expect as we hit October and November. And with that, Temple is right in the middle of the mix. This past Saturday, Cincinnati, Memphis, and SMU all won their non-conference games and are currently leading the pack with 3-0 records. Cincy pulled out a big win against Indiana 38-24. This could be a strong resume booster for a program with playoff aspirations. Moving down the line, Houston and UCF are both 2-1. In Week 1, the Cougars fell to Texas Tech but completely dominated their last 2 games against Rice and Grambling State. On Friday, UCF lost for the first time this year in a battle against Louisville. Both Houston and UCF play Navy in their next games for a chance to boost their record to 3-1. Just like Temple, ECU, Tulane, and South Florida hold records of 1 and 2. South Florida and ECU won their first games of the season this past Saturday, while Temple and Tulane were defeated by Boston College and Ole Miss. The Owls couldn't get into the end zone, and Tulane lost by an even 40 points. Tulsa sits at the bottom of the conference with an 0-3 record, and Navy has yet to play its 3rd game, but as of now they are 0-2, awaiting the next matchup against Houston on Saturday. And that game will officially open up conference play in the AAC. For the rest of the American, conference play doesn't start until Week 5, and there we will see Temple take on Memphis right here in the city of brotherly love. Ray and Jackson, back to you guys.
Thanks, Emily. Owl Sports Update will be back on Thursday, and Emily will be a part of it. Make sure to tune into TUTV, where she sits in for Luke Milai on the desk next to Lindsay Moppert, bringing you Temple sports coverage. And then, each week this semester, our 3-show lineup, our Monday sports brief. We are here on Tuesdays with Inside the Nest, and finally, Owl Sports Update on Thursdays, all semester long.
Can't wait to see Emily get her chance to sit in these seats. As for us, it's time for us to disappear for another week.
Don't forget to follow our coverage for the Owls game on Saturday on our social media at Owl Sports Update. For Ray Dunn and the entire Inside the Nest crew, I'm Jackson Neal. See you next Tuesday.